So today there's about 30-minute presentation. It has been presented by Greta. Hello, Greta. Welcome. Greta is product designer at Pixel Degs, background in science and psychology. And for those of you who have worked with Greta, you will know that she is, I've given her 3 Ps. She's passionate, precise, and pragmatic. And she's also quite nervous about doing this for you guys. So I hope you enjoy it. I know she's put a lot of work into it. Anything else to say? A couple of house rules. If you've got questions, stay on mute, put them in chat, and then we'll cover them off at the end. Yeah, so feel free as you go along, stick stuff in chat. If it's really relevant, I might interrupt Greta and tackle it at the time, but what we'll probably do is let Greta have a good run at it and then cover off questions at the end and turn it into a little bit of a discussion. I hope that sounds okay to you. It's worth you also knowing that we are recording this video. Some people haven't been able to come. They've asked me to record it so that we can share it with them later. So do be aware that we're recording this. I think it has only recorded Greta and I as the speakers, but just in case you're worried about that, so that you know. So that's it from me. I'm going to hand over to Greta.
Thank you, Mark. So let's just jump straight in and let's talk about data, and more data. So my background is data science. So for me, I don't know how about you, but everything seems to turn around data. And in the last decade, we actually grew to expect every single thing we deal with to be smart, use some level of AI, machine learning, etc. And I think that we grew to be like surrounded by this illusion of what actually data science is capable of doing. And how many of us actually thought that Alexa is listening in and maybe then sharing that data with Google. And then I start seeing all of these ads that are just about things that I've chatted with my friends. And I mean, it might be true, it might be not. It's threading on that conspiracy theory level, I think, at this point. But actually, it's good to remember that only 10% of projects that include IA show return of investment. Moreover, only 85%, like only 15% of machine learning projects fail or succeed, sorry. What I'm trying to say, when you start talking about numbers, it can get so quickly, so confusing, 10% there, 15% there, and it's almost that overwhelming sense of data everywhere that makes us think, oh, okay, fine, you know, just do you, whatever, fine. But I don't actually believe that it needs to be like that. So less is more is something that we will talk a lot about today. And in data context, I think that what it means is making sure that the data you use is inclusive and intuitive. So there is no need to confuse people with all of those percentages, all of those complex algorithms, etc. You can actually do quite a lot by doing less. So this idea comes from Occam-Razor's principle that suggests that the simpler the explanation is, the more likely it is to be the right one. And in data science, when we develop clever algorithms, you'll very rarely be praised for building a complex neural network that is X layers deep, etc., if that same question can be answered by simple correlation. Don't overcomplicate it, because the more complex the idea becomes, the harder it is for us to understand how to deal with that information. So how to achieve this? I think that the best way to approach it is to ask the right questions to begin with. And not all questions are equal. Most of the times, unambiguous, easy to interpret questions bring more value. So when you know exactly what you want to, where you want to get to, what's that North Star of yours, it's actually then easier to see which path, what data you actually need to use. And now this mathematician, George, said, to ask the right question is harder than to answer it. And the next couple of minutes, I guess like 20 or so, we will be talking about what could be those right questions that you could be asking. We will be covering Google Analytics and what data is readily accessible there. And the idea is to actually give you some overview of what are the most common questions and see if you can apply them in practice at your organization. So there will be 3 scenarios, one focused on traffic performance, then user engagement and content performance. So let's start with traffic. Usually when we want to track data around traffic, we want to really understand the quality of it. The most common questions are to do with which traffic channel generates the most users, which users are the most active, which channel converts the most of them. The data types that are available on Google that will help you answer these questions there are quite a lot of them. And by the way, Mark will share this presentation with you after, so that you can maybe use this almost like a cheat sheet if you are going to apply it in practice. But essentially, it's enough to look at the default channel grouping, which comes by default from GA, then pages per session, bounce rate, page views, users, and I'll cover e-commerce conversion rate in a little bit. So let's have a look. First of all, which traffic channel generates the most users? And I think most of you already use it. It's usually useful to think about it from the point of view of how many users per default channel we can generate. And on the right-hand side, you see a screenshot from a Data Studio. If someone doesn't use Data Studio yet, I highly recommend it. I love it because it allows you to remove that somewhat complex Google Analytics interface and show off pure data. Also, I love the fact that you can add questions that are more intuitive and include descriptions that could, let's say, help your colleagues to use that data more readily. So in this case, what we see that in this example, organic search is outperforming everyone with no competition whatsoever. The next question that we had was around actively engaged users. And here we can use a little bit more complex variation of the data. This is something that I use when I want to show people where maybe they could focus on more when thinking about SEO, or where they could maybe rethink their budgets if they're spending a lot of money on, let's say, paid search. So what we have here is pages per session, bounce rate, and page views. So as you can see in the graph, pages per session is on the left on the y-axis, bounce rate is on the x-axis, and the page views represents the size of the bubble. The larger the bubble, the more page views it represents. So in this graph, what you want to see is everyone sitting at the top left corner, because what it means that the user is not likely to bounce, and they are likely to browse a lot of pages on your website. So you could think that people here, they're engaged. So what we can see in this example, that paid search is actually outperforming everyone else. However, it's only representing 127 page views. So the bubble is teensy tiny. The largest organic search bubble sits over here, and it's at 80% of bounce rate and just under 2 pages per session. So my concern would be, or the following question would be, to actually see why organic search is underperforming. What could we do to push this bubble further up to the left? And again, mind you, Data Studio allows you to pose this graph with question and description how to use that data. So this is something that you wouldn't get necessarily on Google Analytics, where it's just, again, that next level of intuition, helping your colleagues to actually consume the data there and there. Okay, so the next one would be the traffic channel that converts the most. And mind you, this is a bit more e-commerce focused and talks about maybe more like revenues and things like that, although the principle could be applied to more generic organizations as well. So e-commerce conversion rate is a built-in Google Analytics metric. It's, I think, a matter of a toggle, or at least that was the way I've set it up before. And essentially what it does, it shows you how, it just shows you the conversion rate, straightforward. The graph on the right-hand side actually shows you how useful it could be to see the breakdown based on traffic channel. And direct, for example, converts 33% of users, whilst organic search converts 13%. That's quite interesting, I guess, and makes sense because maybe once they've users had a look at your product, they thought about it, they came back to the website using some direct channel. Maybe they've saved a URL somewhere and they've accessed it via some other means. But what makes me quite interested is to actually see that referrals work better than organic search still. So which refer channels are pushing our conversions? So that's where I would maybe focus to actually see what we're doing right with referrals and see if actually organic search could be improved by improving SEO metrics, or maybe this is just our best performing conversion rate and we shouldn't need to worry about it at all. And to be absolutely honest, 30% conversion rate for e-commerce is it's good. So that's actually dummy data. Anyway, so this more or less concludes the traffic performance analysis, and you can maybe start noticing that we covered quite a lot of detailed information about traffic by using only a handful of data types, and most of those you definitely have used before. I can bet you, but I wonder how many times you maybe thought that there could be more than you can do and push it further. Now with user engagement, we have a similar story where there are a couple of basic questions that we are more likely to do, but when it comes to understanding user behavior on your site, it's a bit trickier. Because first of all, it's not as simple as the more the better, the more users you get, the better the site is, something like that. And also you don't necessarily always have a clear idea what your organization should consider to be engaged user. And I know from the list of guests today, like with some of you, we've worked personally trying to understand what is the success measurement for engaged user. Now, still, there are some basic questions that most of us will be asked to answer when dealing with data, and that's, has our user engagement improved? We've spent this amount of money improving our site. Do we see a change? Now, next one would be, what do users click on top nav, on a hero, on a promotional banner, whatever that might be. And also understanding where users drop out. So where users are likely to drop off from like a conversion funnel. Where should we focus our efforts? And again, we have a number of data types we will be looking at, but let's just straight jump into the questions. So the first one, has user engagement improved? The key here, I think, is being able to track certain data points across the time. So if you agree that there are 4 or more or less data types that you as an organization consider to show user engagement, just ensure that you can track them across the time and use, again, simple things like comparing it with the previous period. I mean, mind you, comparing it with previous month, it might not be okay for every single organization. So for example, if you're e-commerce and you're heavily dependent on holiday periods like Christmas, etc., you probably want to measure your performance based on comparison with previous year. or previous period that should have had same levels of user traffic, for example. In here, what I'm doing is using average time on page, the amount of users, the bounce rate, and the exit rates. These are so vanilla. I'm sure that they will match most of the organizations. However, don't get me wrong, I don't think that this is the secret recipe. What I think is important here is to ask that question, what your organization considers to be user engagement, what user is considered to be engaged, and then ensuring that you just have a quick overview of those key metrics and just seeing, oh, please, God, just make these numbers green, don't make them red. And if it makes it red, just try to track back and see what you might have done or what might have happened outside of your control that influenced the drop or increase for that matter. So again, quite simple and intuitive in my personal opinion. When it comes to measuring clicks, you can't really go without talking about custom events. So Tag Manager, if anyone is using it, you know that you can go quite wild and crazy with all of the custom events and their complexities, etc. But at the same time, I don't really think that you need to overcomplicate it. So when it comes to what do users click on the most, in the example you see here, for this specific client, although the data is dummy, we're focused on whether the users are using the anchor navigation, so this sticky nav bar that we've implemented for the client. And that's it. That's all we wanted to know. And we wanted actually, the main hypothesis we've raised for that specific interaction was that the links that appear closer to the center were used more. And actually the real data showed it. It was the correct hypothesis. And what I'm trying to show you here, that it was simple custom event plugged in at the right time for the right reason. The actual implementation wasn't that costly, and it could have been done by someone with not a lot of experience with Tag Manager. But the value that we saw is actually by asking the right question and anticipating what we could see and how we can then use that information to further optimize the site. So because we saw this to be true, what we from now onwards we're saying we should do, if you have a CTA that you want people to click on, put them in the center. So I shouldn't be maybe saying that, but manipulate the user to achieve what you need, or help them find the better things, the things that you think that they might be interested in. Anyway, let's go then to the final question that is to do with user engagement, and that's the funnel dropouts. Again, more maybe conversion, e-commerce focused idea, but again, on allow your team and yourself to have an easy overview of where do people drop off. And what, in my personal opinion, is very important that you can't, when you think about funnels and conversions in general, you can't focus on doing everything in one go. Inefficient time-wise, cost-wise, and also when you change the whole thing, you don't really know where you succeeded and maybe where you've the changes you've applied didn't really work out. So what I'm trying to say is that when you have conversion funnels that are easy to read, it doesn't have to look like that. Google Analytics themselves on the interface has some funnels that you can use. But what I would be advising you to look for is where there's more dropout. I don't know how intuitive it is, but sometimes it looks like that final step before the user converts is the more important one. And you must go and see if that converts well. But sometimes the problems lay before you even get to, let's say, the checkout, the basket page. All in all, just see where you are performing better and just focus to improve other areas. Now, I feel like I'm talking a lot, and I know that I am, and not seeing your faces makes it a bit more challenging. But I hope you are with me still. And let's just jump to the final scenario, which is to do with content performance. And I think that this is the one that we maybe don't really focus that much on day to day, unless you're a content manager, I guess, in the organization. But it's understanding what content actually users find to be most interesting and useful. And there's so many questions you can be asking, from which one is the most visited, where users spend the most time on, top landing, top exit. And there are only a couple of data types that I think can be used to answer all of these questions. And moreover, I think that sometimes a good old spreadsheet is all you need. So this is, again, data analytics, and we're using a little bit of, not that fancy, but still useful heat maps to show you where the hotspots are. But all these 4 questions and even more could be answered just by choosing correct data types and congregate it into a table. So let's say in this case, the example we see that gets loads of page views compared with any other page that you have on the site. People do spend time there, although 5 minutes, 46 seconds, that sounds like a lot. And most of the users enter the site, so that's the top landing page here. And it's the most likely to have the exits, the percentage of exits, the dropout is here as well. So all in all, I would say, okay, this is definitely the most visited page, and it does show off like a page where people spend a lot of time. But maybe I could do something more to ensure that they continue the journey so that the exit rate can be reduced. Or maybe, and just maybe, it's okay, I'm fine with it. That's another thing that I find sometimes, that people are so focused on improving bounce rates, exit rates on certain areas of their site that are just naturally the end of the journey for a user. So you shouldn't need to be worried about that too much. Okay, so that has been quite a lot of information. So as you can see, you have loads of questions you can ask. There are number of points, data points that you can use to go through and help your business. What I hope you can see, like a tendency, that at all points, if you have a good question, you can actually find simple data to help you answer and help your team to improve. So use data to answer questions your organization cares about. It's all about less is more. Don't try to use every single data point that is available to you, or just because John said so, or just because Greta said so, or whatever, you know. Think about you and your organization. Ask the right questions. And just a thing I hope like everyone remembers, is that not all questions can or should be answered with quantitative methods. Qualitative research is a very useful piece of practice, especially when trying to understand user behavior. Anyway, I hope that there are questions.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Great. Thank you, Greta. So certainly from my perspective, and when I was talking to Greta about this session over the past couple of weeks, I mean, one of the things that really strikes me is whether you're someone generating reports or you're a recipient of reports, the kind of main shift that kind of Greta got me thinking about is this idea of, you know, analytics, they're complex, their dashboards are complex, there's loads of information there, a lot of it isn't necessarily relevant, and in a lot of reporting I see, a lot of that data is there just because it exists. So this kind of clear idea of applying less is more to your reporting, or the way you think and look about your analytics, that I think it's a very strong one. And then the other for me was certainly this shift from, if you think about analytics as being full of different data types, they can all contribute to answering some kind of nuanced questions, as long as you know what those questions are, which I think is actually a great way of thinking about reforming the kind of reporting that you ask from the people who are running your website, or indeed you set up to better understand what all of these kind of different data types are talking about. Does anyone have any questions? I think you are all able to come off mute if you'd like to, or you can put anything in chat, but if you don't, I would love some feedback on this session. It takes a bit of time to plan. We've made these shorter now. We're coming in just under half an hour, which I hope is kind of a useful kind of a bite of information in between all the other Zoom meetings that we're all in every day. So could we run over some of the key tools you recommend using to make sense of analytics and remove the squelch? So Greta, what are your kind of favorite key tools?
Yeah, it's always about the right tools as well, isn't it? Again, I just use Google Analytics, Tag Manager, well, G Suite, essentially, including Tag Manager, GEA, and Data Studio. When it comes to communicating information to our clients, I do prefer giving them access through Data Studio, just because, yeah, you don't need to overwhelm people with complex analytics interface, or at least that's just my opinion. But yeah, G Suite.
Okay, cool. So listen, that's it from Pixeled Eggs today, guys. I hope it's been a good session for you. Please do feedback to me. You know, we put effort into putting these on for you guys. We hope they're of value, and we're always looking for feedback and ways that we can improve them. And that's it from us. So thank you very much, everyone, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks, guys.